Hi, I'm Valerie Milano from Aspiring Magazine and the Hollywood Times, and I'm so happy to have our guest here today with her short film. I'm going to have her introduce herself. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Valerie. It's nice to meet you. My name's Lindsay McIntyre, and I'm a filmmaker and an artist I live in Vancouver. That's the unceded territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh. And I'm the writer, director, one of the producers, and the editor of the short film NIGIQTUQ, the South Wind, which is the Oscar qualifying at the moment.
Yay, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And I was very happy to see your short film. And so, having left Nunavut with her mother in 1938, young Marguerite must negotiate the unspoken pressures of being Inuk in her life in the South. When an extraordinary letter arrives from home, she discovers what's really expected of her. Based on a true story, the film follows an Inuit mother and her daughter as they struggle amidst forced assimilation after being brought from Nunavut to a new life in the South by a Canadian police officer in the 1930s. Lindsay, this is an interesting story about people that most of us know very little about. How did you come across this story and what made you want to make this short film?
The story is one that's really important to me. It's part of a bigger, broader story that I've been working with probably for about 15 years. But it's a true story. It's my grandmother's story. And it's the story of how my family came from living in Inuit Nunangat, which is the Inuit homeland in the north of Canada, to the south, to Edmonton, which is where I grew up. And so it's a true story, and it's a story that I think really matters in our collective history. I think we know a lot about the big uglies, the residential schools and the 60s scoop and those kinds of things, but we don't know a lot about what things were like for Inuit in the early days of Arctic interest. And the story was told to me by my grandmother, who's depicted in the film as a little girl, actually. But she told me the story in another film that I made about this topic called Her Silent Life. And if you watch that film, you can hear her telling me this very story and what life was like for her when they first came down to the South. I really wanted to explore those challenges and those difficulties, those ways of thinking about when you can speak and when you can't, and just the kinds of, I guess, the embodied struggles of adapting these two very different ways of living and thinking about being. Yeah, so that's the story.
Yeah, thank you. Some of the lines in the movie are in Inuit and require captions. How hard was it working with these native actors? And did you experience any language difficulties in communicating on the set?
So the actors, the two women in the show, are speaking Inuktitut, and that is something that was really essential to me from the beginning. To be clear, they're not actually actors. They are community members. When we set out to make this film, because part of the purpose of it was to honor my grandmother's story and her journey, I reached out to community members and said, "Is there anybody who'd be interested in helping me tell this story?" And Brenda Amaklak, who plays Kumatna in the film, was one of the people who reached out to me, and she is incredible on so many levels, and even just as a human being. But so then we were looking for a little girl who spoke the same dialect as Brenda, and that was a really critical component. There was no way that I was going to work with actors and teach them Inuktitut. I wanted to work with Inuit who know how to be, and then I'd rather teach them how to act. But the performances and the acting really came out of thinking collectively about how can we tell this story right, and how do we honor Marguerite and Kumatna and their story in the way that we tell it. And so the ways in which we did those things really was a collective effort, largely between myself, Brenda, Naomi Natsek, who's the little girl, Ami's mother, Louisa Natsek, as well as my producer and the other really wonderful crew members that I had on those days with me. So it was maybe a different kind of a way to make a film, but I'm really proud of the things that came out of it. And I don't speak Inuktitut fluently. I'm learning how to speak it. So for sure, I had lots of support from Brenda and Louisa, and there were some really extra special considerations we had to think about, especially kind of framing things around Naomi, the little girl, because the story's about this little girl who comes down to the South and doesn't speak a lot of English and is expected to assimilate and take on all these kind of big concepts really quickly. And in the making of the film, we realized, whoa, we could enact this same harm to this little girl who also speaks primarily Inuktitut and has come down to the South to participate in this in a way that is a bit overwhelming. She's never had a film crew and a bunch of cameras and people around her before. And we had to be really careful about how we did those things. But I have to say it was a really wonderful and beautiful experience from start to finish, language and all.
Oh, yeah, because my next set of questions was all about that. Because Naomi, the young Marguerite, being in the film, she did such an amazing job with her part.
Mm-hmm.
I would have thought that she was a little actress. And Brenda, the same thing. She played her role to a T. Wow, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Added in the music and the cinematography, and this is a thoughtful look at in your life. How did those elements come together for you?
I had some really incredible collaborators. The music was made by a Métis artist named Brett Parento, and we did a lot of back and forth of talking through the sort of like feelings that these characters might be going through. And I think he just has so much skill in just like reaching out and finding a thing. So I think having that closeness or that ability to communicate, especially when it comes to music and sound design, matters a great deal. And I was really pleased with what he came up with. He actually just released the soundtrack of this short film with a label as a cassette tape that you can purchase. So that's a kind of like an interesting new development.
Yeah.
The cinematographer was my partner, Wes Murin, who's an incredibly talented filmmaker, cinematographer, and camera operator. And we chose to use broken glass filters. So every single shot of the film is actually filmed through pieces of broken glass. And it's something that he brought to the table, but it's also interestingly something that I used to do in some of my other more experimental documentary films. I used to shoot through melted glass or broken glass as a way to wreck the focal attention of the lens. But we just felt like it brought a really great kind of feel to the overall production and tried to really stay with the characters and think about what they were going through and have production design and lighting and music really support those things.
Wonderful. Gosh, what a great collaboration. So, winding down here, the film is obviously on a festival circuit. Tell our readers and our viewers, how can they find out more about the film, more about you and your other works? And what are you working on next? Or have you thought about it?
That is not a couple-minute answer, but I'll do my
Okay.
best. The film right now is actually, yes, screening quite a bit. It just screened at the Pocahontas Reframed Film Festival this weekend, as well as at the LA Skins Festival, the Chinese Theater. But right now, you can watch it online at the Smithsonian, the Native Cinema Showcase, which is, I believe, available at least across America. That'll be on until the 29th of November in part of a really incredible program of short films called Belonging, because that's what the film is about. It's also available on Air Canada in-flight entertainment if you happen to be taking a
Oh,
flight somewhere. And yeah, there's lots of information about it and where you can see it on a couple of websites. One of them is called thewordswecan'tspeak.com that really details the information about this short film and awards it's won and various things. And then my website as a filmmaker and an artist is tinymovingpictures.com. And I've made about 45 short films. The feature that is connected to this short film is one of my most important upcoming projects that really tells the story of the journey from the north to the south. So what life was like for Kumatna as an interpreter for the RCMP in the early days of Arctic interest, and then their journey south by dog team to Edmonton in the 1930s, and then maybe the discovery that life in the south is harsher than in the north. So that's a really important project. One more I'll mention really quickly is that I make my own film stock, like with handmade silver gelatin emulsion. And my upcoming project called Tuktuit, which means caribou, is actually made with caribou skin gelatin that I harvest myself from sustainably harvested caribou. And so I'm making the gelatin for the emulsion out of caribou for a film that is about the close and interconnected relationship between Inuit, caribou, and lichen, and habitat disruption in that way. So that's a bit more of an experimental project. Doesn't look maybe quite like you expect things to look on screen, but it'll be a couple of years in the making, so you'll have to wait a little while for that one to come out.
Wow, so interesting you are, Lindsay. My goodness. We're going to try to get everything we can into this article to learn more about you. And I thank you so much. We are the Hollywood Times today is our website, and our YouTube channel is the Hollywood Times Official. And we will hopefully be able to meet in person one day, because you are fascinating, and this project is wonderful. And we're rooting for you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Valerie. It was an absolute pleasure. I appreciate the support.
All right.
Bye.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.